This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. How does weightlessness affect man living in space for long periods of time? Answers to this question are of prime concern during the nation's present series of missions aboard Skylab. Astronauts living in the roomy Skylab space station must devote a substantial portion of their daily routine to biomedical objectives. Diets are carefully controlled. Blood and waste samples are taken regularly for later analysis. Stress equipment, including a bicycle exerciser, provides a day-to-day reading of the astronaut's condition, not only for study later on, but as an immediate measuring stick to make sure they can return to Earth safely. Before Skylab, the longest Americans had stayed in space was 14 days. Long-duration space station missions will provide vital data to doctors here on the ground who must determine the human capabilities and limitations for space missions of the future. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Launched last summer, the nation's most recent orbiting astronomical observatory achieved its scientific and technical objectives within the first 5 months. Today, it continues to add significantly to our understanding of the workings and life cycles of distant stars. Named Copernicus, the 2.5-ton observatory is the largest and most complex unmanned spacecraft ever launched by this country. From above the Earth's distorting and obscuring atmosphere, instruments aboard Copernicus have taken thousands of clear, precise measurements of distant stellar objects. Data is gathered in the X-ray and ultraviolet portions of the spectrum. These waves cannot be observed on the ground, yet with the aid of a modern-day Copernicus, they are providing a wealth of new information about how stars are born and how they die, and in turn, how the universe itself is evolving. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Aircraft noise reduction is the subject of intense research by many organizations in many parts of the country. Most efforts, including several within NASA, are concentrating on ways to quiet the noise levels of engines. Other studies have indicated, however, that aerodynamic non-engine noise may also be a significant contributor to the total problem. Noise generated by interactions of a plane with the air around it. Tests at NASA's Flight Research Center, California, have concentrated on this aspect of the noise problem. Aircraft have made unpowered landing approaches and touchdowns, while sensitive microphones have recorded the noise levels. This data, when compared with similar information gathered with engine noise present, will help engineers to better understand the various sources of aircraft noise, and in turn, to assist them in designing a quieter, total vehicle. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. 2 scientific space probes launched a year apart are now en route to the largest planet in the solar system, Jupiter. Pioneer 10, launched in May of '72, is due to fly past Jupiter this coming December, gathering and relaying back to Earth our first close-up information about the planet and its environment. Earlier this year, a second vehicle, Pioneer 11, was launched toward a December 1974 encounter with Jupiter. Essentially a duplicate of Pioneer 10, Pioneer 11 is to study the giant planet from a different perspective if the first flyby is successful. Instruments aboard both spacecraft will measure Jupiter's temperatures, atmospheric constituents, magnetic fields, and radiation belts in detail. The dual mission of Pioneers 10 and 11 continuing to expand man's knowledge and understanding of his solar system by visiting a large, distant planetary neighbor for the first time. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. In orbit for nearly a year, the nation's first Earth Resources Technology satellite has swamped scientific investigators around the world with data for analysis. Nicknamed ERTS, the unmanned satellite can map the entire globe once every 18 days. Pictures taken in the visible as well as the infrared portions of the spectrum are experimental in nature. They're being analyzed to determine the effectiveness of monitoring and inventorying natural resources on a global basis from space. Up to 200 pictures a day are in the hands of investigators to see how high-resolution space photography can assist all of us in our day-to-day lives here on the ground. the first Earth Resources Technology satellite, an initial step toward the day when our planet's stores of resources may be inspected, detected, and protected routinely from space. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. By the 1980s, a new round-trip transportation system would have replaced most of today's expendable rockets and spacecraft. The reusable shuttle, capable of flying to and from space over and over again, will carry out a full range of assignments, from deploying unmanned satellites into their proper orbits to transporting non-astronaut scientists into space to conduct investigations firsthand. Piloted by man, the shuttle will fly into orbit, then return to an airplane-like ground landing at the completion of its mission. Design and development of the shuttle system by NASA and its contractors are well underway right now, aiming toward horizontal flight tests within the atmosphere by 1977, first orbital tests by 1979, and routine operations by 1980. The reusable space shuttle, an efficient, less costly, and flexible transportation system to meet future space challenges. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Among the growing number of space-developed techniques and technologies which are finding their way into everyday living here on Earth is a miniaturized, lightweight medical diagnostic system. Developed originally for manned spaceflight, it can automatically and rapidly perform 12 simultaneous analyses on a single drop of blood. Existing automatic blood analyzers require 50 times more blood than the space-developed system, and only one test at a time can be performed on a given sample. If present validation tests are successful, availability of the new miniaturized analyzer could result in a doctor being able to perform tests right in his office and have the results in minutes. The same holds true for geriatric and emergency room patients and accident victims, where rapid, multiple diagnoses with minimum blood samples are vital. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Mercury, closest planet to the Sun, is about to be studied at close range for the first time by an unmanned scientific spacecraft. Little is known about Mercury. It's difficult to observe and photograph from Earth because of its nearness to the Sun. This fall, a single Mariner spacecraft will be launched to investigate Mercury's environment in detail and to send back high-resolution TV pictures of its surface. En route to Mercury, Mariner will first swing by and examine Venus close up. The Venusian gravity field will then be used to whip Mariner onto a path toward Mercury. This so-called gravity assist technique, or interplanetary slingshot, greatly reduces the amount of fuel and propulsion that would be required if the spacecraft were to fly directly from Earth to Mercury. In addition, scientists will receive meaningful data from 2 planets for the price of 1. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Fly-by-wire is a term heard often during manned spaceflights. It's a means of controlling a vehicle with a computerized electronic control system. Now, fly-by-wire is under study by NASA for possible use on aircraft as well. Present-day airplanes are controlled directly by pilots through mechanical systems. The day may come when aircraft are too large, too fast, and too sophisticated to depend strictly on human response for safe, efficient, and comfortable flight. Anticipating such needs, engineers and pilots at NASA's Flight Research Center have been successfully flying tests during the past year with a jet equipped solely with electronic controls and a computer from the Apollo program. No mechanical backup system is on board. Aircraft fly-by-wire research, one of many programs to ensure that when future aviation requirements arise, the technology and know-how will be ready. This has been a NASA Space Note. This is a NASA Space Note from the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. In July 1975, the first international manned space mission is to take place. 3 astronauts inside a modified Apollo spacecraft are to rendezvous in orbit with 2 Soviet cosmonauts in a Soyuz vehicle. The 2 craft are to dock, followed by 2 days' worth of tests to check out a new universal docking system and to demonstrate the ability to transfer crew members between vehicles. The American crew assigned to the Apollo-Soyuz test project will be led by spacecraft commander astronaut Tom Stafford, who's flown on 3 previous space missions. Apollo Command Module pilot will be 42-year-old Vance Brand, who will be making his first flight. Docking module pilot for the U.S. will be astronaut Donald K. Slayton, one of the original 7 Mercury astronauts who's about to make his first space flight aboard Apollo-Soyuz. This has been a NASA Space Note.